This video was inspired by another video. It's inspired by a video by Kathryn Porter. Kathryn Porter, who is an expert on energy and the grid and associated matters. And I don't have heroes or heroines really, but I have people I respect, and she is one that I highly respect. And in the video, and I put the link to it below, by the way, she does come up with, she covers many of the things I've already covered in different ways in different videos. And I thought, well, what if I combine these points together? And I've covered many of them, as I said before, but I make it maybe simpler to understand. But she did come up with a new figure for me, and the figure is that from 2006 to present day, had we not had renewables, we'd have saved £90 billion just on power charges. But you know, that's the smallest part of the loss of renewables, the very smallest, because doing away with the steel industry, the aluminium industry, all the costs on business that have been applied ever since, and on ourselves, etc., has caused the economy to collapse as industries have been exported and exported, to the point that today we have the highest energy costs for industry in the world. And we still want to increase it because we have a madman in charge called Ed Miliband, who can't last. And I keep saying this, he can't last, because Starmer's going to have to choose between, the economy is already in total collapse, in my opinion, but it getting much worse and really, really bad, or getting rid of him. So he's going to have to get rid of him. Anyway, what I want to do in this video is pick out the points of Kathryn's video and maybe make it simpler to understand. Okay, so here goes. And we're going to start off with just what the grid's about, the basics of the grid. And I've covered them before, which are frequency and, the balance of the grid. So let me just go over that again. The frequency that the grid has to have as a discipline, and the keeping in balance supply and demand. So here we go. Let's explain that. Okay, I'm going to keep this simple. Above me, we have the energy supplier and the customer. The customer, of course, here is domestic, obviously, I mean industry, everything, the total customer. And in between them is the wave. That's the alternating current that traditionally, and this is the traditional setup, that we supply to the customers. So all your cookers, all your fires, things like anything electric, a home works on alternating current. And that's how it happens. So let me take the first scenario. And the first scenario is demand starts to increase, because demand varies throughout the day, as shown here. So the blue part here of this demand curve is what we call the base load. And that really, in a perfect way, would go all the way up, touching that red part there. But this is the base load that consists of nuclear power. Nuclear power, for example, can't change its speed very well. Coal power, that can't change very quickly. And the yellow part, that's the gas, that can change quickly. And so you have traditionally about 70% in a perfect world would be base load and be chugging away really efficiently and cheaply. And then you've got your gas coming in to take care of these ups and downs during the day on the demand curves. So that's how traditionally it worked. But in this old way, there's one very important characteristic, and it's to do with that wave, to do with the alternating current. All the electricity sources, be they coal, nuclear, gas, all turn turbines to make the electricity, and they all turn them at the same speed of 3,000 revs per minute. And they all had the flywheel nature of them meant these huge things dampened out any small variations to give small power. So they had inertia. And the inertia in that system was huge, and it meant that everything was nicely dampened out and evened out, and all they had to do was make sure the sine waves, the output, coincided with each other, and you're away. And that's how that system ran for many, many decades. So that's how the system worked. And it worked very well because everyone was on the same page. Everyone was producing electricity using the same 3,000 RPM design turbines, producing power that had a lot of inertia in it to smooth out the differences, because everyone's got these huge flywheels, etc. And all you had to do is make sure the phases matched, which they were well used to, and you're away. But then everything changed. And it changed because the DC coming in from all the things like solar and wind, direct current, just a level current, not alternating, that had to be converted. And to compound this, if you take the energy from, say, one gas station, let's say 800 megawatt gas station, and then you have to look at how wind has to supply that equivalent. And don't forget the wind maybe only be a 35% load factor or a 30% load factor. You would need maybe 900 connections instead of one. So instead of one connection from the gas turbine plant, you could have many hundreds to get the same amount of energy into the grid. Much more difficult to manage. And not only that, all supplying on DC. So they had to go through the electronics to smooth that out. But as you do this, as a whole system, think of the whole thing, it loses its inertia and it's reducing and reducing, so the slightest thing out can really rock it off. And this is the same demand curve in today's terms. So we now have a low inertia and a very sensitive system. So if you increase demand, that would, unless you increase the supply, it would lower the frequency. Or if you lowered the demand without changing the supply, it would higher the frequency and knock the system out. And the frequency has to be kept accurate to within about 0.4%. That's about the maximum you can drift out. So it's really critical. And so very often now, it isn't just a case of blackouts because of supply amount, it's to do with stability. But there is an answer to this, and it's a very costly one. Well, because under the renewables, we don't have any flywheels built in, we don't have stability built in, we don't have the inertia in the system. We have to add the inertia by adding, in the first part, flywheels. And so Miliband proposes to build 100 of these flywheels. They're built under the pretext of balancing the grid, but really they're there just to keep the grid inertia stable and balance the frequency. Well, we haven't got them built into the system before, you have to add them. But that's only part of this costly solution, because all of those flywheels are additional costs over and above traditional generation. Or I'll continue. I will just explain in very simple terms what the inertia in the national grid really is and how it works. Now, if you look at the back of any appliance, electrical appliance, you'll see the voltage, and then you'll see it's 50 hertz. That's how many cycles a second the electricity is coming at, 50 hertz. So how does that fit in to the 3000 RPM that these motors run at? And the answer is, it's very simple. It's 3000 revs per minute. Divide the 3000 by 60 and you get the revs per second, which is 50 hertz. That's where that comes from. And to do that, I'll use my hamster friend that's been popping up throughout this video so far. Just look at this hamster. The hamster's power is going to be driving this flywheel. That's what it is, a flywheel. And what you'll see is it get out of control. The hamster leave it, but the flywheel will continue to spin. It is the inertia in the flywheel that keeps it spinning. Now, the whole idea in the grid is to keep everything spinning at that 3000 RPM, not faster, not slower. And in this case, the hamster applied too much power. And what happened if you increase the energy and don't increase the demand with it, you will go out of control, just like that flywheel with the hamster. So too much power will increase the rotation, increase the speed, increase the frequency, and the system will fail. And the exact opposite can happen. Don't have enough energy going into the flywheel, say the hamster's going slower, will slow the flywheel turning down after the initial inertia is overcome, and therefore the frequency will drop and the system will fail. Now I have slowed this video here down so that you can see actually what happens. The hamster is applying the power and that can keep the flywheel spinning. Once it leaves, however, in this case, this particular flywheel has got very little weight in the rim and it stops relatively quickly. The more weight in the rim and the more power you need to get it going, but also the higher the inertia you build into it. And basically that depends on the weight on the rim and the distance from the center. So those are the two factors that really control the inertia. And our electricity system is just the same. And of course, Wind vanes like this have the weight towards the centre, not at the extremes, but that's only one of the reasons they have low inertia. The next reason is because the load is changing all the time. They're not reliable in any way at all. There are other issues to do with how they connect to the grid, but they have next to no inertia. And of course, solar panels change their outputs by the second as a cloud comes over. So both wind and solar give varying inputs, like the hamster actually not just constantly running, but skipping and hopping and everything. On top of that, there are problems again in conversion to the AC current. So now for the last hamster lesson with our hamster friend. Here you'll see, and I've slowed it down, the hamsters are applying a very even load to that flywheel. In fact, hamsters are very good because the structure of them, the bone structure, shows that they've always got their feet in contact, at least some of their feet in contact, pushing away at that flywheel, applying a very constant load. And you don't get that with solar and a cloud, and you don't get that with wind and a gust. And so those are very unreliable sources. In fact, hamsters driving flywheels would be better than our wind and solar farms. For those who like it more exact than I've explained it, this is the proper definition of inertia. The inertia of a flywheel, also known as its moment of inertia, is a measure of its resistance to change in rotational motion. Now that is the key of it, really. It's even if there's variation within, it resists that because of its inertia, and it keeps it going. Essentially describing how difficult it is to speed up or slow down the flywheel when the torque is applied, and is directly related to its mass distribution and its distance of that mass from the axis of rotation. The higher the inertia, the more resistant it is to changes in speed. That really sums it up. More technically, but I try to explain my videos to everybody, and hence the hamster interlude. However, flywheels are not the only way you can help stabilize the inherent lack of inertia in the green energy solutions. You can also use batteries, and that is the truth of why they're being installed, not for bridging the gaps, but to stabilize the grid. And it's all additional costs. These can output a very level amount of direct current. Although it's level, when it's converted to alternating current, it's quite a stable alternating current. So both flywheels and battery farms are there to control or help control the grid's frequency. It is simply a lie to pretend they can be used as backup to the grid, because the amount of energy they can store is so little compared to what is needed for backup that they serve no real role for that, except for very, very short periods indeed. But rather being sold to you as frequency stabilization, which is all extra cost, they're sold to you as grid backup to make it more palatable to spend the money. In previous videos, I have exposed the fiddle that's being done on flywheels and batteries. This is the one on flywheels, and I'll be putting some links in the description below this video. You press on the word more to see the extended description below each video, and I'll be putting some links in there to link to those videos in case you haven't seen them. Now, interestingly enough, in Australia, when you add a wind or solar farm, you've got to add a great grid stabilizer, which is a flywheel by another name. In this mad new green energy world, the wind can vary by almost the second. You can actually have a gust of wind and you get much more, and then it dies down. And the same with solar. A cloud can come and cut the solar down. And that instability has to be balanced, as I've explained. And as you can see here, that's what Australia are having to do when you install a new solar or wind farm. But how often in the UK, for example, have we had problems with this frequency problem? Because that can bring the grid down just as well as a shortage of supply. Well, this graph is from NESO, Ed Miliband's own operational lot, and you can see there's a gradual reduction in the total system inertia, making the system much more sensitive to any change. Any sudden change can knock it out. And this is the trend we're heading into, and it's getting worse. Now, this is the number of times in the winter of 2024 that we had excesses where it went outside the frequency. And there are two curves here, there are two graphs. This one here is the graph when the breach was of the lower operational limit. In other words, the demand wasn't enough, and therefore frequency went too high. And the other line is when the demand was too little and the frequency went too low. You can see what's happening. We are now in an unstable world. We are sacrificing all the logic of engineering. We are sacrificing everything for an ideologue, for an ideology that doesn't stand any proper scientific or technical examination. This graph is a more long-term one, showing the difference between way back in the winter 2016, when we had about, let's say, 6.5 was the level of disruption, and when by 23 it was 9. That's a 50% increase. Now the flat part, the plateau there, is when we had COVID and a lot of activities stopped in driving this madness. So that's what we're up. We're at 50% on these frequency outages, if you like. In the December of 2024, December the 22nd, we actually had a real crisis on it. So we're coming right near to the limits, right near to the breaches all the time. We are heading for blackouts. Now, the blackouts, as I said, can be caused by lack of energy, or they can be caused by grid frequency outages. Either will do that. And that's what we're heading into the world of. On January the 8th this year, 2025, we had a real crisis with demand, and we came within a whisker, an absolute whisker, of the system failing. And yet NESO have not come clean on what really happened and what they had to do, because no longer do we have these organizations being open and declare what the problems are. We have organizations hiding the information so that they can get away with their, if you like, political agenda. That's what Britain has become. The system should be designed so that the dropping out of the biggest single energy contributor can be coped with. So Kathryn Porter summarised the situation as this for January the 8th. On January the 8th, the GB power market came within a whisker of blackouts. NESO used almost every last megawatt available, with just 580 megawatts of cushion, only 2/3 of the contingency that should be held, and nowhere near the single largest in-feed loss, which is supposed to be protected. This is how bad it's become, and that's why I have been predicting blackouts. And so bad was the situation on January the 8th that NESO actually wrote a blank cheque to Holland bringing energy into us and not even agreeing the price. That's a situation that still has to be sorted. It was an absolute crisis. And it's a crisis because the background I've explained that's going to get worse with time. Now, what this graph shows is something really interesting. Our total energy consumption has been reducing because as we've exported industries, and here it makes it very clear, you can see this line here is industry. And as we've exported industry, the amount of energy needed by industry has been dropping. And so we've actually built decline in to our energy market. So we only can survive now because we've exported the industries. You could not make it worse than this. In other words, we're not even in a position to attract industries or these huge artificial intelligence center demands. We're not in a position to do it because we don't have the infrastructure in this modern economy we're supposed to have to even cope with this incoming of business. This government can't add together 2 and 2. They don't even make 5. I think they make 2 and 2 into 12 or something. They are absolutely children running the economy and running this system. Now, this graph shows the difference between US energy prices and UK energy prices. And they were always high. Well, way back in about 2007, they were pretty near. But blimey, by the time you got to 220, look at this big increase there. That's when the WEF, the World Economic Forum plans came in for the 2020 to 2030 plan. And this is what's happening. Well, as usual, this video is unscripted. I could go on and on and on. I have about a dozen subjects a day coming in that I could cover. I'm spoke for choice, as it were. And I just start one like this and I see half a dozen others I could cover because the world's so mad. None of my videos are scripted. I try to speak to you as I would talk to you, just meeting you in a pub or something. So that's how I try to come across. If I tried to script them, it would take me too long to make them. So I just have to do it from the top of my head. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to meeting you again in the next one.